Hi, I'm Tina.
And I'm Rich.
And if there's one thing we've learned in over 20 years of marriage,
It's that some days you'll feel like killing your wife.
and some days you'll feel like killing your husband.
Welcome to Love, Marry, Kill.
Hey, Rich.
Hey, Tina.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Michigan.
It is beautiful.
Time change tonight. How are you
we
feeling
lose
about
an
that?
hour. I don't like to lose an hour. I like to gain an hour.
Yeah, it is much more pleasant. So you're pretty perky considering your international travels this week.
It was a whirlwind week, but
Yeah.
I am back from Berlin and feeling back to normal already.
I don't know how you do that because you got there and you pretty much didn't sleep for how many hours?
Probably like 24 hours I didn't sleep because I
Yeah.
flew like a red-eye flight and I can't sleep on airplanes. I just can't do it. So I was up for a
Did
long,
you take
long
an
time.
Ambien and you still couldn't sleep?
I took an Ambien and I still couldn't sleep.
That's wild.
I was in a,
Doesn't that
I
put
must
you
have
in
been
some
in
sort
a,
of suspended?
yes.
Yeah.
I was in a fog because I watched an hour of a movie, Long Legs. I downloaded it before I got on the flight.
Mhm.
I watched an hour of it after I took the Ambien and I couldn't get to sleep. And I don't remember a thing from it. So
Wow.
yeah, I was in a fog.
And then you get off the airplane in a foreign country. Are you still in a fog?
Yes, still in a fog.
I don't like that for you, really.
Used to it.
But you got there safely.
I did, and I got
Which
back
is-
safely.
That's great.
Yeah,
Well, I did bring you a snack.
I'm
And
glad
I
to hear that.
apologize to the people of Pennsylvania and the people, especially of Pittsburgh, because the snack has nothing to do with them.
Oh, okay.
But it's one of my favorites. I made them recently for a Patreon episode.
Oh, yeah.
So I was just craving them. So I made you some maple cookies. I made you maple brown sugar cookies
I love those cookies.
with some pecans in them.
Awesome.
All right, do you want to try them?
I sure do.
All right. So what did you think of the cookie?
I loved them. I mean, they're
Yeah.
so good. I love brown sugar cookies. I love maple flavoring. I think it's an underrated flavor. The only thing I don't love is the pecans.
Really?
They're not bad, but to me, I would.
I like
prefer
something
them
to
without
sink
the
my
pecans.
teeth into. So I really like a nut in a cookie. And
Yeah.
one of these days I'm going to make chocolate chip cookies. I'm going to put walnuts in them and you all are just going to have to deal with it because I never, ever do that.
Okay. I give them 9.5 out of 10.
9.5.
I just deducted a half
dare
point for the
you.
pecan.
Oh, all right. Whatever. Before we get started, I want to thank our friend Debbie from True Crime University for recommending this case to us. Debbie's the best. If you haven't listened to True Crime University, please do. She's great. The true crime community is so generous. Debbie did this case too, but she reached out to me and said, hey, this would be a great fit for you guys. So that's just how great everyone is in the true crime community. So thank you, Debbie. We love you.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie.
Today I'm going to tell you the story of Dr. Autumn Klein and Robert Ferrante. On April 17th, 2013, Dr. Autumn Klein, 41, worked an exceptionally long 15-hour day at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center Presbyterian. Autumn was a highly sought-after neurologist who specialized in women's care at the apex of her career. Her husband, Robert Ferrante, 64, was a well-respected researcher in neurodegenerative diseases. Autumn and her husband lived in a beautiful home just minutes from the hospital. Her day began at 8:27 a.m. and didn't end until 11:18 p.m. She texted her husband of 10 years, Bob, and told him that she was about to leave the hospital to begin the 18-minute walk home to their cozy 100-year bungalow that they shared with their 6-year-old daughter, Sienna. Be careful, Bob texted back. As Autumn walked through the door, Bob handed her a drink he'd made for her. Seconds later, she collapsed on the floor and began to moan and breathe erratically. Her eyes were open but not focusing. At 11:52, Bob frantically called 911.
Somebody tell me now, what's the address of your emergency?
Hello, please. I'm at 219 Lytton Avenue. I think my wife is having a stroke.
Okay, what city, township, borough? What city are you in?
I'm in Pittsburgh.
Okay,
My
calm
name
down.
is Bob Ferrante. Please.
Okay, just hang on a line, Bob. They're coming.
She has this sort of like apatoid hand. It's all stiff. She's not breathing normally now.
Okay. I mean, her chest
She's not breathing normally.
her chest is rising and falling, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Big, huge breaths. She's just having difficulty breathing. She's having so much difficulty breathing. Now she's like having a seizure, like she's... Jesus Christmas, sweetheart! Please! No! In church, she felt so faint that she almost just went down.
When was that?
It was about almost 2 months ago, and then she's had 2 of these other issues.
Was she getting like injections or?
All kinds of drugs, yes, all kinds of drugs.
We had to piece together that 911 call, and the 911 call was several minutes long. What did you think of that?
I don't even know what to think about that. I mean, I'd love to hear a recording of him talking when he wasn't on the 911 call, because I don't know how much of that was just him being completely frantic versus how much of that is just the way he talks to people. But it was very strange.
I think that was unusual for him.
Sure.
I think he was a calm, professional man.
Yeah. It was also really disturbing to hear Autumn breathing in the background of that one part.
We will talk about that a little bit more later. This didn't make the call, but at one point, Bob recommended that Autumn be brought to UPMC Shadyside instead of the UPMC Presbyterian, where she worked, which was a level 1 trauma center. UPMC Shadyside was not. Bob said that it would be more convenient for her folks, but they were in Baltimore.
Okay, that doesn't make much sense.
When paramedics arrived 12 minutes later, which is kind of a long time, considering that they're in downtown Pittsburgh,
Yeah, you would think.
Autumn was lying on her back, eyes open but unconscious. Her vital signs were rapidly deteriorating. The first responders noticed a gallon-sized bag labeled creatine on the counter with a small vial next to it. I don't believe that the first responders took those with them.
Okay.
Autumn's usual pale complexion was cherry red. The ambulance rushed her back to the hospital. She had left just 63 minutes earlier. When she arrived at the ER, Autumn remained unresponsive and her vital signs continued to crash. Her heart rate was in the low 40s. Her blood pressure was 48/36. Her pupils were no longer reactive to light. Doctors and nurses worked quickly together to insert a breathing tube, start an IV, and draw Autumn's blood. It was especially challenging because Autumn was 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed only 107 pounds. They moved to her femoral artery to get more blood and failed again. They decided to put a center line into her jugular vein for easier blood draws and medication dosing. When nurses were finally able to collect a blood sample, as it flowed into the tube, they noted unusually bright red blood. Blood coming from a vein is less oxygenated than arterial blood. The bright red venous blood indicated that oxygen was not being delivered to Autumn's cells. They were suffocating. When Bob Ferrante arrived moments later, he told the doctors that Autumn had been suffering from severe headaches in recent weeks while undergoing fertility treatments. The doctors feared a hemorrhagic stroke and rushed her to get a CT scan and an EKG. Neither test revealed any issues. Autumn appeared to be a healthy 41-year-old woman. The doctors were confused about what was causing her sudden deterioration. She wasn't suffering from a heart attack, stroke, or a brain aneurysm. Why was Autumn crashing? Concerned doctors from all over the hospital crowded into Autumn's room to assist in her care. When the initial lab results came in, her condition was even more perplexing. Her blood counts appeared within normal range, although her oxygen level and pH were both off. Epinephrine was being administered every few minutes to keep her breathing. As the hospital staff worked feverishly, her husband offered, quote, "She really enjoyed what she was doing. She loved her job, and she would never want to survive if she couldn't be herself and continue her work."
That's a weird thing to say.
Yeah. At 2:17 a.m., Autumn went into cardiac arrest. The doctors took turns straddling her on the gurney, aggressively delivering chest compressions, breaking the frail woman's ribs in the process. Just as they were about to call a time of death, a thready pulse was felt in Autumn's carotid artery. A defibrillator shocked her heart back into a regular rhythm, but her pulse was still weak. Doctors decided to use extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO, to deliver more oxygen to Autumn's blood, but she began to crash again. ECMO pumps blood from the body into a heart-lung machine. Carbon dioxide is removed and oxygen-rich blood is warmed and then delivered back into the body. It's often used as a short-term solution when the patient is struggling to get enough oxygen, but the procedure put Autumn's limbs at risk of amputation because of reduced blood flow, but it was the only solution her doctors had at the time. She was also placed in a hypothermic state, which sometimes has favorable outcomes after cardiac arrest by putting less strain on the heart and brain. Autumn's heart rate returned to normal, and she was stable through the night. In the morning, she was removed from ECMO and taken to the emergency department to the cardiac floor of the hospital. Her blood pressure was still low, and she remained non-reactive to light, had no gag reflex, and did not react to pain stimuli. Autumn's EEG, or electroencephalogram, which measures brain waves, was flat, usually indicating an irreversible coma. One doctor called her profoundly comatose and put her chances of a full recovery at less than 4%. But because she'd been kept in the hypothermic state, they hoped once her body was at a normal temperature for 72 hours, she'd have a more favorable prognosis. Dr. Clifton Calloway, an emergency physician, when asked to consult on Dr. Autumn Klein's case, suggested she be tested for cyanide toxicity. Her blood was drawn and sent to a lab in Virginia for analysis. It was a long shot, but worth a try. It would take a few days for the result.
Cyanide at toxic levels can render a person unconscious in a minute and kill them in as little as 5. A lethal dose is 250 milligrams, about 1/100th of an ounce. Cyanide poisoning causes convulsions, coughing, and something called the cyanide scream.
Do you remember during the 911 call when Autumn was moaning?
I do.
I think that might have been the cyanide scream.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of that before. Cyanide comes from algae, fungi, and bacteria. It also occurs naturally in fruit seeds or stones, such as apples and peaches, and also in cassava roots and Madagascar bamboo. The golden bamboo lemur who grazes on the bamboo has developed a high tolerance to it. It's also a component of cigarette smoke. Cyanide starves the cells of oxygen, eventually shutting down the brain and the heart. It's rarely used in homicides, likely because it's hard to obtain. Although uncommon, it is sometimes used in suicide. A 10-year study in New York City showed that of 6,500 suicide deaths, only 17 used cyanide as a means. Telltale signs of cyanide poisoning are cherry red skin and the smell of almonds.
Or burnt almonds, I think. Remember, Autumn had cherry red skin when Bob called 911.
Right. In New Jersey in 2003, a teenager purchased cyanide online under the guise of plating metal, but used it to poison and kill a young man who was pursuing his girlfriend. So it's interesting. Plating metal, is that like the use for cyanide?
It's one of the valid uses of cyanide.
Are there a lot of valid uses for cyanide?
There are some valid uses. It's used in the tanning process. It's used in the preservation of wood. And I mean, there's just some medical uses for it too.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about those in a little bit.
Interesting. Okay. Autumn Marie Klein was born in Baltimore, Maryland on November 30th, 1971.
Hey, that's your birthday.
It is. To her strict but adoring parents, Lois and Bill. Autumn was their only child, born to them later in life. Lois worked for the IRS and Bill was an electrician. Although she was an only child, Autumn was lucky enough to grow up with her 4 cousins who lived next door on the other side of a row house. Sharon, 17 months older, was Autumn's lifelong best friend. They even developed a private language that only they understood. Sharon had a bed in Autumn's bedroom. She spent every weekend with the Kleins and has fond memories of pancake breakfasts on Saturday mornings and dancing in the kitchen to 50s music. Autumn knew from a young age that she wanted to be a doctor. She and Sharon played hospital with their stuffed animals. Autumn attended St. Paul's School for Girls, where she excelled academically. In middle school, she fell in love with science. In high school, she began performing in plays. Innately shy, Autumn blossomed on stage. After graduation, she decided to attend Amherst College, a small, highly selective liberal arts college in central Massachusetts where Robert Frost once taught. Lois kept a tight rein on Autumn and had a hard time letting her go away. She told Autumn she couldn't go, but she went anyway. Autumn, in part, chose Amherst because the boy she was dating went there, but they soon broke up. She was the first in her family to attend college. It was a big deal. Enjoying her newfound freedom, she returned home as little as possible. Autumn majored in neuroscience and women's studies. She participated in the work-study program by helping out in the dining hall a few days a week. She made friends quickly. Many of them became lifelong friends. Autumn became concerningly thin. Her friends suspected she might be suffering from an eating disorder. She barely ate and had an exercise bike in her room that she seemed to always be riding. When her friends contacted Lois, Autumn's mother, she told her if she didn't knock it off, she was going to make her come home. It seemed to work. Autumn loved college life and her freedom. During her second year at Amherst, Autumn became an RA and continued to work in the cafeteria while focusing on her pre-med classes. She graduated magna cum laude in 1993 and went on to Boston University's rigorous 7-year dual MD PhD program. She was a dedicated student, laser-focused on becoming a doctor, but Autumn still found time for her friends, dating, completed a marathon in 3 hours and 48 minutes, which is really good, and spent a semester in Paris during her radiology rotation.
So people like Autumn, I don't understand how they do that.
I'm always amazed by people like that.
Like, I could barely go to college and keep up with my classes, let alone do all those other
I don't know,
things.
trained to run a marathon. Very
She's a
impressive.
very ambitious woman.
After an internship at Brown University, she entered residency in the Harvard Neurology Residency Program at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Massachusetts General Hospital, and ultimately served as chief resident. In 1995, she worked at the Bedford Veterans Administration Medical Center lab under a professor of neurology and pathology, Dr. Neil Kowal, and a renowned researcher named Robert Ferrante. Autumn was passionate about helping women through neurological pregnancy issues, particularly epilepsy, migraine headaches, as well as the effects of oral contraceptives and hormones on headaches. She founded Brigham's Women's Neurology Program in 2003 in Boston. After years being in ultra-competitive Boston, in 2011 she moved to the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and founded a women's neurology program where she worked until the time of her death. Autumn was a researcher, author of books and scholarly journals, a practitioner, lecturer, wife, and mother. She thrived in all of these roles. She was called a rising star and a pioneer in her field, nationally recognized as a leader in women's neurology. She knew the importance of studying women's health as its own distinct field and was proud to offer a different perspective than her male colleagues. In a tribute to Autumn in the February 2014 issue of Continuum, her colleagues wrote, quote, "She had a passion for her clinical mission to bring expertise to the care of women with neurological problems and to help them achieve both their family and medical goals. She understood that patient education was essential for excellent care, and she dedicated herself to the role of an available and supportive physician. She gave patients time, and she listened as she sought to help them understand their illnesses so they might become their own advocates. Autumn was brilliant, capable, compassionate, and talented at work, but her favorite role was mom."
So I hope I painted a picture of Autumn being just this amazing physician and an amazing woman.
Yeah, she had so much going for her and very ambitious and really super impressive.
Robert Ferrante was born on October 21st, 1948 to Jessica and James Ferrante. He grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts with two older siblings, Diane and James. James was a pastry chef and Jessica worked part-time as a seamstress. Music and education were cornerstones of the Ferrante household. Bob graduated from the private boys' high school, Chauncey Hall School, in 1966. In 1970, he graduated with a bachelor's degree from the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, and a year later, a master's degree in neuroscience, just as the field was burgeoning. In August 1971, he married his first wife, Diane McLaughlin, an elementary school teacher, which was the same year that Autumn Klein was born. Bob began his career as a neurology research assistant and later as a research supervisor. He worked for years at the Eunice Kennedy Shriver Center before he moved on to Massachusetts General Hospital, where he focused his attention on Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is a rare genetic condition that causes the deterioration of brain cells, impacting thought, mental health, and movement. The Ferrante's first child, Kim, was born in 1980, and their son, Michael, in 1983. They were a happy family who enjoyed sports and nature together. Bob had always planned on going to medical school and began applying to programs sometime in the late 1980s. But then life took an unexpected turn when Diane began exhibiting signs of bipolar disorder. This made marriage and parenting difficult. In August 1988, they filed for divorce after 17 years of marriage. While Bob cited Diane's mental health as the problem in their marriage, she later said, quote, "He wanted me barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen." Diane wanted the world to know that Bob was controlling and had a temper. Their divorce decree was very detailed. When Diane moved out of their marital home, she was allowed to take 132 items with her. This part was really funny. It's like super, super detailed. I'll post a picture of it. So she was allowed to take their china service for 12, 2 Christmas cacti, 4 tissue box holders, and 6 green placemats, among other things.
That's really strange.
They were to split custody of the children, but soon after the divorce, Diane dropped out of their lives. Bob's father, John, moved in to help raise the children. Bob, by all accounts, was an ideal father. He coached sports teams and was at all the important school events. The headmaster of Michael's school said that Bob was, quote, the most exemplary father any boy ever had. Though he was busy as a researcher, he never missed a game. He was always there for every event. People loved him, but not everyone. In 1993, encouraged by his boss, Bob made time to get his PhD in behavioral neuroscience. He completed his dissertation, Mitochondrial Energy Impairment as a Model for Huntington's Disease.
Oh, I read that.
Have you
That
read
was
that?
really good.
It was a good one.
Yeah.
In 1996, upon receiving his PhD, he said, quote, I am forever indebted to my family, especially my father, James Vincent Ferrante, for their unflagging support, encouragement, and assistance during these past years. Their pride is a source of great satisfaction to me. The PhD earned Bob the validation and respect he'd been seeking from his colleagues. He became a frequent guest lecturer and speaker. He earned countless grants and accolades for his work on Huntington's disease, ALS, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and other neurodegenerative diseases. He was the lead researcher on a study using creatine therapy for Huntington's disease.
So he was also very accomplished and impressive.
I mean, he really was. He was doing very important research.
Mm,
He did strike me as kind of an odd guy.
okay.
A lot of the people that worked in the lab with him kind of implied that he was difficult to work with.
Okay.
We'll be back after a break. When Autumn Klein first walked into Bob Ferrante's lab in the fall of 1995, she was sporting a rebellious pink streak in her blonde hair and wore ripped jeans. Bob was dubious that she had what it took to be the reliable and discriminating lab assistant he sought. Bob was a difficult and demanding boss who liked things done his way. A former employee called Bob unpleasant and said he had frequent personality conflicts with people in the lab. But Autumn quickly won him over with her wit, intelligence, and diligence. Despite the 23-year age difference, they became close friends. Bob, divorced at the time with 2 teenagers at home, didn't have time to date. In 1998, Autumn finished her dissertation. This is another one that you've probably read.
Of course.
Beta amyloid injections cause cortical injury and oxidative damage in the mouse cerebral cortex.
Wow.
What a coincidence, right?
Yes.
She and Bob didn't become romantically involved until she was almost done with her dissertation. Autumn was mature for her age and Bob was young for his age, so it worked for them. They were active together, biking, hiking, and traveling together to France. Bob was a gourmet chef and loved crafting complicated meals for them. After they got engaged in the year 2000, Autumn moved in with Bob, his father, and children, but she had her own bedroom. Lois Klein said, quote, "Who am I to tell her who to love? I accept people for what they present to me, and he presented to me okay." They were married in an intimate candlelit ceremony on May 18, 2001 at the Old North Church in Boston among 50 friends and family. Autumn's cousin, Sharon, was maid of honor, and Bob's son, Michael, was the best man. They had a quick honeymoon in Kennebunkport, Maine, before returning to Boston for Autumn's graduation from her MD-PhD program. The next few years were a whirlwind with Autumn's internship at Brown University, then a neurology residency at Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's, and Massachusetts General, where she was chief resident. Autumn worked a grueling 80 to 100 hours a week.
Wow.
In the spring of 2006, while in Switzerland, Autumn learned that she was pregnant. Bob had reservations about becoming a father again at an older age, but he warmed to the idea. Sienna Sophia Marie Ferrante was born in January 2007. Autumn was 35 and Bob 58. How do you think he felt being a father again at 58?
I mean, who knows how he felt? It does feel, to me, that would feel really old to have kids. Like just knowing that,
Just being done with that part of your life.
Yeah, and just knowing that by the time they are getting done with high school and going into college, you're going to be like really old if you're still around at all. So it would just be a weird feeling, I think.
Autumn loved being a mother, but she was not willing to sacrifice her career. The following years were hard on Autumn and Bob. They adored their new daughter, but they were both driven and dedicated to their careers. Autumn and Bob were both doing very important research. They struggled to find a groove in their parenting styles. Bob's schedule was more flexible, so he picked Sienna up from daycare and started dinner. But he'd start calling Autumn soon after he returned home, and he badgered her about leaving work. He would call her and she'd be like, "Oh, I'm on my way. I'm coming home soon." And then he would call her 2 minutes later and he would say, "Where are you?" And she'd say, "I'm 2 minutes further than the last time you called
I mean,
me."
he would have had to have known that her schedule was really demanding and,
Well, in the Boston traffic.
well, yeah, that too.
Yeah. Her schedule was demanding. She was juggling research and treating patients, and her weekends were devoted to caring for Sienna. The commute from the hospital to their home in nearby Canton was harrowing some days in the notorious Boston traffic, taking more than an hour. I think some days her commute took her 3 hours both ways.
Geez.
From the outside, the couple seemed to have it all, but there were signs of trouble. Bob stopped accompanying Autumn to her family events. He didn't attend Sharon's wedding and stopped visiting her parents. And when the Kleins came to visit, Bob couldn't be bothered with them. On Sienna's first birthday, Autumn wanted to try for another baby, but Bob resisted. He hated that people often thought that he was Sienna's grandfather. Because Autumn had been an only child of older parents, she desperately wanted to give Sienna a sibling close in age. Because of their age difference, adoption would be challenging. Bob finally agreed in 2010 to try for another baby, but he made it clear to his wife that if she were to become pregnant, the baby would be her responsibility.
Wow.
After a year of no baby, they started IVF, which Autumn paid for. She underwent 4 cycles of IVF and didn't get pregnant.
In 2011, Autumn and Bob decided to move to Pittsburgh. The University of Pittsburgh Medical Center wanted Autumn to start a women's neurology program. Bob moved his lab, 9 research grants, along with his 3 mice colonies to the university to continue his Huntington's disease research. His lab was valued at $3 million. They were thrilled to buy a beautiful home for $590,000 in a historic district of Pittsburgh, within walking distance of the university and downtown. Being outside of Boston was more relaxed, and they were able to live with more balance between their careers and their home life. They loved living in the city and being able to walk to parks, libraries, and museums. It was much more affordable, and Autumn received a nice bump in salary.
I read that she received 3 times her salary when she moved.
I would call that a nice bump.
Yeah. And the change in their lifestyle must have been amazing, too.
Oh,
and
yeah.
She got at least 2 hours a day back. And
yeah. Well, the cost of living in Pittsburgh is way lower than Boston, too. So it was much better for Sienna, too. Autumn wrote in an email to a friend, quote, "I like the easier lifestyle here. A bit different in that every person is not some big shot somebody or other, but I kind of like that. I was getting tired of the overprivileged. I feel like I deal with real people, real issues here." Life in Pittsburgh was the fresh start that the couple needed, but soon Autumn became depressed about not being able to get pregnant and the lack of support from her husband in her job and with Sienna. In a personal journal entry in July 2012, Autumn wrote, quote, "I am here writing now because I am not sure who I can talk to about things. I just found out today my 3rd IVF cycle failed. This time not even fertilization. I am not sure where to go from here. I just know that I am incredibly unhappy, yet I am not sure why. I have wanted another child for years, but is what I want another child or what that represents to me? Why do people have children? Are they a representation of self? Do they represent more love in life? More pleasure? Do I want another child because these things are lacking in my life? It is not clear to me. I just feel like something is missing in my life. I think that thing missing is love." Oh, it's really sad to read that.
It is really sad. That's some pretty heavy stuff to write in your journal.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like she was really struggling with, some of the big questions in life, why am I here? Why do you have kids?
Those are deep questions.
Yeah. By 2013, the marriage seemed irretrievably broken. Autumn confided in friends that she was making plans to leave Bob. She was frustrated by Bob's lack of emotion and empathy regarding her 4th failed IVF procedure. Autumn emailed Bob the following shortly before her death, quote, "I think at some point in the near future we should go out and talk. I really don't know where to begin with all that has been going on in life recently and in my head. I have tried to talk to you but can't. I have written you many letters I have not sent. I don't know where things are going to go, and you may not like what you hear, but I think it is about time we talked." After he'd read the email, Bob Googled "divorce Pittsburgh, PA," and "does increased vaginal size suggest wife is having sex with another?" and "how would a coroner detect cyanide in an autopsy?" Oh my goodness, that is quite a combination of things to Google.
Mm-hmm.
An older search from January 2013 asked, "What is malice of forethought?"
Those, I'm sure, were just educational searches, just
probably
curiosity.
watching CSI or something like that,
Exactly.
right? Autumn's doctor told her that her eggs had mitochondrial damage. Bob suggested that creatine could possibly help improve the quality of Autumn's eggs, as creatine provides energy.
So they're having a lot of marital difficulty, but
Mm-hmm.
Autumn still really wants another child.
Okay. Autumn agreed to add creatine to her diet. In fact, the day she collapsed in her kitchen, she had texted Bob that morning that she'd be ovulating the next day, and he reminded her to take the creatine.
So if you remember at the very beginning of the episode, he handed her a drink when she got home.
Right.
And that was her creatine drink. When Autumn was hospitalized, barely clinging to life, Bob called his 2 adult children, Michael, an investment manager, and Kimberly, a doctor, for support and asked them to come to Pittsburgh. He also called Autumn's elderly parents, Lois and Bill. They rushed to Pittsburgh from their home in Towson, Maryland, to see their daughter. But when they arrived, Bob told them they needed to wait until Kim and Michael arrived later that evening to go to the hospital. Bob knew at that point that Autumn's prognosis was very grim. Later that evening, when Lois and Bill sat at Autumn's bedside holding her hand, Lois knew their daughter wasn't coming back to her. Sharon, Autumn's cousin and best friend, called and talked to her as Lois held the phone up to her ear. Quote, "I need you. Sienna needs you," Sharon pleaded with Autumn. Bob had told Sienna that Autumn had gone on a work trip, but now he finally told her that Mommy was sick in the hospital, and Sienna got to spend several hours with her.
How old was Sienna at this
She
point?
was 6.
Okay.
As a neurologist herself, Autumn had left a directive that she didn't want to be on life support longer than a week if there was little to no chance of recovery. On April 20th at 12:31 p.m., 3 days after she first collapsed in her kitchen, Autumn was declared brain dead and removed from life support. When asked about an autopsy, Bob was encouraged that it should be done, if for no other reason, to determine whether Autumn's condition was the result of a genetic condition. What if it was something that could be passed on to their daughter? But Bob was adamant, no autopsy, not even a less invasive autopsy that consists only of an external examination and tox screening. Quote, "What would an autopsy tell us?" But it wasn't Bob's decision to make. In Pennsylvania, the law mandates that an autopsy must be performed when there is not a clear cause of death. I like that law.
Yeah, for sure.
We've had this happen in several cases where, the body is cremated
Right.
before there can be an autopsy. So that's a good law. Autumn had expressed a strong desire to be an organ donor. After her liver and kidneys were harvested for donation, her body was transported to the medical examiner's office. At the time Autumn's organs were harvested, it wasn't known that she died of cyanide poisoning. Organs can recover from poisoning as long as they weren't damaged from prolonged oxygen loss. In most cases, cyanide dissipates quickly and the organs are still usable.
Now, I was going to ask you, I think you mentioned earlier that they tested her blood for cyanide when she, shortly after she came into the hospital. Did they didn't have the results back of that test?
No, they didn't. And if you remember, they sent that blood off to a different state. I don't think there's a ton of labs that actually test for cyanide. So yeah, they hadn't received the results back yet. Organ transplants must occur very quickly after death, and the organ is kept at very strict guidelines. Heart and lungs must be transplanted within 4 to 6 hours, the liver within 8 to 12 hours, and the kidney has a more lenient time of 24 to 36 hours. As the window of time closes, it becomes more likely that the organ will fail. You've seen this on TV all the time, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah,
people
they're rushing the organ over too. Yeah.
But I didn't know the windows were that
No,
small.
I didn't either.
On Sunday, April 21st, 2013, Autumn's body was autopsied by Dr. Todd Lukasevic, a forensic pathologist. He opted for a full autopsy as opposed to the less invasive external exam. He found nothing abnormal other than a benign tumor in her uterus, which makes me wonder if that was why she couldn't get pregnant.
Yeah.
Autumn's liver and kidney had been donated, but the rest of her internal organs appeared to be healthy. Dr. Lukasevic sent Autumn's brain and heart to specialized pathologists for further testing. Her body was sent to the funeral home the next day to be cremated. Autumn's cause and manner of death were both listed as undetermined, pending examination from the other specialist and the toxicology report, which wasn't expected for weeks. Later, Autumn's heart and brain were found to be normal, except for a congenital heart defect in one of her valves, found in about 2% of the population, but it was determined not to be a factor in her death. The heart defect is sometimes an issue, generally in older patients, but Autumn exhibited no symptoms of heart disease. But remember when the doctor in the ER tested Autumn's blood for cyanide? The test result was returned 2 days after the autopsy. The amount of cyanide in her blood was 3.4 milligrams per liter, a deadly amount several times over. A deadly amount is anything over 1 milligram. Autumn's cause of death was changed to homicide, and the manner was cyanide poisoning. The funeral home was called to retrieve Autumn's body for additional testing, but it was too late. Her body had been cremated the day before, but Dr. Lukasevic did save many vials of blood and tissue samples. Now that Autumn's manner and cause of death were determined, the police needed to confirm the results with their crime lab. Vials of Autumn's blood were sent to the police lab for additional testing. We're going to talk about this later on. But was Autumn's cause of death really cyanide poisoning? That question unfortunately remained unclear. If cyanide poisoning was her cause of death, some medical experts questioned why she didn't die instantly, especially with that amount, because that was a huge amount, right?
Right.
Could there be an underlying health issue?
It just seems like with that amount of cyanide, how would it not have been the cause of her death? It just seems like there was so much cyanide.
Right. And I think because she had medical intervention pretty quickly, and she was put on the ECMO machine, that is probably what extended her life. Enter Detective Jim McGee, a 26-year police veteran, and his partner, Robert Provident, a 25-year police veteran. Their first task was to determine how Autumn had gotten the cyanide in her system, intentionally self-administered, accidentally, or intentionally poisoned. Autumn did not work with cyanide in her practice or research. McGee and Provident's first order of business was to pay a visit to Bob Ferrante at home. He covered his mouth in shock when told that his wife died from cyanide poisoning. First he said, "Why would she do this to herself?" Then, "Who would do this to her?" The detectives requested that Bob hand over any medications or fertility drugs Autumn was taking, including the creatine he gave to her daily. They also took 2 hairbrushes and 3 small vials filled with an unknown substance. Autumn's mother, Lois Klein, was confused how Autumn had come into contact with the cyanide, and law enforcement was not sharing the findings from their investigation with her. She told the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, quote, "I certainly am working under the assumption that she would not do that to herself. I am totally dumbfounded. I can't imagine anyone would want to hurt her. Could someone have given it to her without her knowledge? Could she have taken it on purpose? Could she have run across it in her own research? I have no knowledge, but I have great doubts that anything like that would have been used in her own research." The investigators on the case had to rush because they were afraid Bob would leave the country. They called in the FBI to help. They wrote over 100 search warrants, and 10 detectives headed to Bob Ferrante's house. When he didn't answer, they removed a window air conditioner to gain access to the house. One of the detectives crawled through the window and opened the door for the others. The search warrant allowed them to take a plethora of items, including cleaning supplies or anything in the kitchen that might contain cyanide. They left with 5 boxes of evidence, including the contents of a paper shredder, a vacuum, and both Autumn and Bob's cars. 35 devices, including phones, computers, hard drives, and thumb drives, were seized and later analyzed by law enforcement.
35 devices. That's a lot of devices. You think we have that many devices in our house?
I think I have that many devices in our house.
Probably.
Do you know how many old iPads we have?
I know, we do have a lot.
Whenever I go into the Bluetooth, it's just you have more than you think.
Yeah.
In late May, the couple's financial records were subpoenaed. The records revealed that Autumn and Bob had a prenuptial agreement. They kept a lot of their money separate, and Autumn paid for the expensive fertility treatments. A lot of Bob's money went to his adult children, despite both of them having well-paying jobs, which had been a point of contention in their marriage. Bob's personal accounts held over $2 million, so if he had killed Autumn, it likely wasn't for financial reasons, although Autumn had 3 life insurance policies totaling $150,000. During the search, Bob came home. He was nice enough to the officers, but called his attorney, who rushed over to the house. They didn't find anything much of interest, but a safe in the basement contained about $35,000 in cash. Do we have a safe in the...
I'd rather not talk about that.
But a lot of times this happens where people have $10,000 plus in their house.
Yeah.
I probably have 43 cents in my purse now.
Yeah, that's probably what I have too.
They spent about 2 hours in the house. The next day, Autumn and Bob's offices were both searched. In Bob's office, detectives found a receipt for a 250-gram bottle of potassium cyanide sent overnight on April 15th, 2013. It was sent to a lab assistant, and it cost $163.94.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
The bottle seal was broken and found to have Bob's thumbprint. Computers were seized, a few glass vials, creatine, and another safe. Detectives thought they had enough to make an arrest, but the DA wanted them to gather more evidence and rule out suicide or a possible accident. And what was the motive? That was still unclear. The safe found in Bob's office was forgotten for months. When it was finally opened, 3 pair of diamond earrings were inside, along with baby teeth, a wooden alligator, an abundance of coins, and a MacBook Pro, which prosecutors called the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, if you find a MacBook Pro inside a safe, there's probably going to be some good stuff on there.
I just want to talk about baby teeth for a second. For years, I hung on to baby teeth.
Did you really?
And eventually I was like, I don't think anyone's ever going to want these baby teeth.
No?
So I threw them away. Do you think our kids are ever going to come to us and
I
be
know.
like, Mom,
What did you do with our baby
why don't
teeth?
you have my baby teeth? You didn't love me. Among the Google searches found on the MacBook were human toxicity, 3, nitropropionic acid, and toxic dose, human 3, nitropropionic acid, cardiomyopathy, and detecting cyanide poisoning. Those aren't incriminating at all.
No,
right?
not at all.
We'll be back after a break.
Weeks after the search on Autumn and Bob's house, Detective Jacqueline Weibel remembered the box of shredded paper.
Remember that during the search of the Ferrante home that they had found a paper shredder. So this is the
Okay.
contents from the paper shredder.
Gotcha. She put her interns to good use, gave them the box, and wished them luck. Their tenacity paid off hours later when they were able to piece together a letter. It said, "My dearest Diane, Kimberly, Michael, and Sienna, words cannot express my deep and undying love for each and every one of you for oh so many reasons. You have all been my rock for many years, my reason for living. The memories I have had with each of you as a family together would carry multiple lifetimes for any person. I have been very fortunate in having each of you in my life. I want you to remember those times and keep them close to your heart and in your mind, not the horrific and inexplicable events that have happened over the past 3 weeks. This experience has taken an incredible toll on me, one that I can no longer burden. While I remain steadfastly adamant that I did not take Autumn's life, I no longer have the strength to carry the weight of losing her. Someone who shared all the pleasantries and meaningful events, especially with Sienna, with the added suspicion that I would be the cause. It has been too great a weight for me to carry. I feel like a pariah in my community, even though there are some very special people around me that have my greatest interest at heart. Kim and Mike, I had that strength for you, but these are a very different set of circumstances. Please forgive my weakness. Please, all of you care for Sienna. I will miss many of the important events of her life. Let her know how deeply I love her and how important it is for her to belong to this family, and that I will be with her in spirit so that she may succeed in whatever her endeavors are, despite the loss of both her mom and dad. Be consistent in your love for her and how you interact with her. That will bring her comfort. Lastly, I will miss each and every one of you. Diane, you and I growing old together and laughing at our experiences. Kim and Mike, your success in life and your future families. Just being together with all of you and celebrating life. Please keep working hard as well as not forgetting to enjoy the successes, even the small ones. Sometimes we forget to celebrate the simple things. Bless each of you for being in my life. I am so sorry for not physically remaining in your lives. I am with Autumn. Love, Dad, Robbie." The interns spent the next 3 weeks puzzling together 10 more letters written by Bob. There were letters to Bob's 3 children and to his sister. The prosecutor would argue that this showed consciousness of guilt.
Would you agree?
I mean, kind of, but not necessarily. I mean, you could be distraught over losing your spouse and
I just
feel
can't
suicidal.
imagine leaving your 6-year-old daughter with no parents.
No, I can't either, but I'm just saying I don't know if I agree it shows consciousness of guilt or not.
And I don't think there was a clear directive of who would gain custody of Sienna. She was only 6.
Yeah. On May 10th, a memorial was held for Autumn arranged by her parents. Her close friend, Ellen Bubrick, gave a eulogy. She said, quote, She was all the things I wanted to be: poised, articulate, successful, resolute, brilliant, beautiful, compassionate, loyal, funny, and kind. She was the best friend you could ask for. The kind of friend you could tell the most personal things, things you're afraid of, things you're ashamed of, things that make us human. And you could tell her knowing that she would treat you with loving kindness and that she wanted to love and support you. It's not just in her work that she left this earth a better place, though. It is in all of the lives that she touched. She lives on in her beautiful daughter, Sienna, in her family, in all of us. To Bob, she loved you dearly and cherished the family you built together. Only Bob wasn't there to hear the touching eulogy. His attorney had suggested he skip the memorial. He and Sienna stayed home. Why do you think his attorney would suggest that? If I was an attorney, I think that would be a really bad look to skip the funeral of your spouse.
I don't understand that either. And for Sienna not to have said goodbye to her mother is also really sad.
Yeah. 2 detectives attended the service and surreptitiously talked to Autumn's friends and family. Ellen shared with the investigators that Autumn would never take her own life. She loved her life and her daughter. She took good care of herself because her husband was older, and she lived with the real fear that Bob would die, and she didn't want Sienna to be left without a parent. Dr. Thomas McElrath, a close friend of Autumn's, told investigators that while at a conference in San Francisco in February 2013, she told him that Bob was unsupportive, controlling, and jealous, and she was thinking about leaving him. Her best friend and cousin Sharon corroborated this. Was that why she had stopped the fertility treatments? Had she changed her mind about wanting another child? She had given her fertility medications to a friend in January.
Bob was giving her the creatine supplement, and I wonder if she was taking that and not the fertility drugs just because she was trying to plan something and she didn't want to give it away. Because if she stopped taking the fertility treatments and the creatine, it would just show that she was ready to leave the marriage.
Right, she wasn't
possibly
committed any longer. Yeah, that makes sense. News of a possible cyanide poisoning was too salacious not to be leaked to the media. Once they got a hold of the story, the media became fixtures outside of Bob's house. He didn't like the attention and felt like friends and neighbors were suspicious of him. He had been ready to retire for a while and was rattled by the cold stares of the people in Pittsburgh. He pulled Sienna out of kindergarten early and went to California to stay with his daughter, Kim. He was there for a month and then decided to move to Florida and live with his sister, Diane. Bob even found a school for Sienna. He knew it was likely he would be arrested and wanted her to stay in Florida with her aunt.
On July 25th, 2013, 3 months after Autumn's death, detectives traveled to St. Augustine, Florida, with Lois and Bill Klein in tow to arrest Bob. The Kleins were going to take Sienna to Baltimore to live with them. But the arrest didn't go as planned. 15 law enforcement officers from different agencies descended upon Diane Ferrante's house, only to learn that Bob had been tipped off and wasn't there. Sienna was at the house, and she was happy to see her grandparents. She hadn't seen them since Autumn's death months earlier. It's unclear if Bob was on the run, but the state police issued a bolo.
Be on the lookout for.
Thank you. Bill Diffenderfer, Bob's attorney, called him and strongly suggested he get back to Pittsburgh. Can you imagine that call? It was like, get your butt. He was pulled over at about 7 p.m. in West Virginia and arrested without incident. He spent 4 nights in jail before detectives Provident and Lutton drove him home to Pittsburgh. He did not fight extradition. Once in front of the judge, Bob was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and denied bail. He pleaded not guilty. The judge issued a gag order. No one was allowed to talk to the media regarding the case to preserve the sanctity of the potential jury pool. Because Bob had over $2 million in cash and investments, over $3 million if you included Autumn's assets, he was considered a flight risk. Most of his assets were frozen until the judge decided how to handle the estate and Sienna's future. About $250,000 was unfrozen for Bob's legal defense, but that money dried up quickly by January. Lois and Bill Klein were 78 and 76 respectively, and while they were doting grandparents, they were too old to keep up with the demands of a 6-year-old. Michael Ferrante, Bob's son, and his wife Nicole filed for custody. Their motion was struck down because they weren't considered to be close enough relatives, and the Ferrantes lived in Massachusetts, not Pennsylvania. So Michael is actually Sienna's brother, and that was kind of strange.
Yeah,
to
that
me.
is strange that they wouldn't be close enough.
Meanwhile, due to the exceptionally complicated chemistry involved in the case, Bob was allowed to work on his case for 8 hours a day from jail. After his arrest, he was put on indefinite leave from the university. Among the evidence against Bob Ferrante were messages between him and Autumn in which he constantly brought up her having an affair. There is no proof that she was. Investigators believed that this was his motive. A lab assistant told the detectives that on April 15, 2013, Bob asked her if they could overnight potassium cyanide to the lab, the best and purest form available, he requested. It wasn't unheard of to overnight chemicals to the lab, but it only happened once or twice a year, and Bob had never made the request before. It cost $163.94 and was paid for with Bob's university credit card. Typically, the grant number for the chemical's intended use was recorded on the purchase order. However, no grant number was listed for the potassium cyanide. Of the 145 chemicals housed in the lab, cyanide had never been among them, and there were no future projects slated at the lab that required it. The 250-gram bottle at the lab was weighed by investigators. 8.3 grams were missing, and Bob's fingerprints were on the bottle. 8 grams is about 2 teaspoons of sugar. Also of interest to investigators was Bob's purchase of a compound called 3NP, or 3-nitropropionic acid, a naturally occurring mycotoxin produced by fungi. It is used in the lab to promote cell death to replicate the conditions of diseases like ALS. 3NP is toxic to humans and animals, causing a dramatic decrease in neuronal degeneration and loss of mitochondrial function. In smaller doses, it can cause lethargy and diminish motor control. One of Bob's lab assistants divulged that Bob had requested 3NP be ordered 3 times between March 6th and April 3rd. 6 weeks before Autumn's death, she had visited her doctor after suffering from extreme hair loss. She asked to have her hormone levels checked. Although Autumn had suffered from migraine headaches for 2 years, she'd recently been having severe dizziness and fainting spells. There's not a blood test that can detect 3NP. Investigators thought that Bob might have been dosing Autumn with 3NP before he became impatient and switched to cyanide before her death. At 1 p.m. the day before her death, Autumn texted Bob, "I have an aura. According to my calendar, I ovulate tomorrow."
Perfect timing. Creatine. Smiley face.
Right.
I'm serious. It will make a huge difference. I'm certain of it.
I sure hope so. Mild headache right now.
Creatine will take care of that, too.
Will it stimulate egg production, too?
Smiley face.
Ugh. Among the Google searches found on Bob's laptop was a search, would ECMO or dialysis remove trace toxins or poisons, detecting cyanide poisoning, potential cyanide neuroscience project, how will a coroner detect if someone is killed by cyanide, and how to remove items from your Google web history.
Apparently you didn't find a good answer for that last one.
Oh, those pesky Google searches. Autumn had been trying to get pregnant for several years. She was consumed with wanting another baby. She even volunteered her sparse free time to snuggle newborn babies in the NICU from 1 to 2 a.m. After several failed cycles of IVF, she took a few months off from the fertility hormones, but recently Bob had put Autumn on the creatine regimen. He'd sprinkle the creatine on toast and put it in a drink for her. He really loves his freaking creatine, doesn't he?
Apparently so, yeah.
Creatine is safe for pregnant women and may support fertility. Research suggests that creatine supplementation during pregnancy offers potential benefits such as maintaining energy levels in the placenta, crucial for fetal growth and development. It may also reduce the risk of birth complications by protecting the fetal brain from oxygen deprivation during labor. Additionally, creatine could support fetal muscle growth by supplying essential building blocks for muscle tissue, but this is a relatively new development and more research is needed. So when Bob began giving Autumn supplementary creatine, he could point to these studies as proof that it may increase her chance of becoming pregnant without raising her suspicion.
Bob's defense filed a pretrial motion to move the trial due to excessive media coverage. The judge agreed to move the trial to Harrisburg, but later changed his mind and the trial remained in Pittsburgh. Assistant DA Lisa Pellegrini was presenting the case for the state. A few days before the trial was to start, she was attacked by the man she was dating. He banged her head violently against the dashboard and physically restrained her. She returned to work. The defense asked for additional peremptory challenges. They were worried the attack would give P.A. Pellegrini undue sympathy, but the judge denied the request. It took 2 days to pick the jury of 8 men and 4 women. Opening arguments were heard at the stately Allegheny County Courthouse in downtown Pittsburgh on Thursday, October 23, 2014, about 18 months after Autumn's death. Judge Jeffrey Manning presided over the trial. Prosecutors wore ladybug pins and cufflinks in Autumn's honor during the trial.
Autumn loved ladybugs.
During the prosecution's opening arguments, Pellegrini revealed that the amount of cyanide in Autumn's blood was 2.2 micrograms per liter. Anything over 1 is deadly. However, there was a problem with the lab result. Initially, it came back at over 3.4 micrograms. I was trying to remember what it was, and I remembered it was like more than 3 times.
This part is a little confusing.
The test was unreliable, argued the defense. Furthermore, creatine can cause a false positive in a cyanide test. Interesting. Also notable were Bob's Google searches of Dr. Thomas McElrath, Autumn's good friend and sometimes conference travel buddy. In February 2013, when Autumn and McElrath were at a conference, Bob worked himself up into a lather and told her he was flying to California after he had allegedly seen flirtatious emails between them. He Googled, "Suicides, Golden Gate Bridge."
I don't think we addressed this earlier when we talked about his Google search. Does increased vaginal size suggest wife is having sex with another? And he really did think she was having an affair.
Yeah, it sounds like it. During the defense's opening argument, Diffenderfer argued that Bob was a model citizen, father, and researcher who, quote, focused on the cure and treatment for probably the worst disease that has afflicted us in the history of mankind. Diffenderfer claimed that Bob told the 911 operator that Autumn should go to UPMC Shadyside because he believed she was having a stroke, and it was a stroke center. When he referred to her folks, he meant her colleagues.
We talked about this when we talked about the 911 call. It wasn't in the clip that we had, but he said something to the effect of, like, well, take her here because her folks are here.
Oh, okay.
And I think we inferred it as her parents,
right,
but
as
he
most
just
people
meant
would.
her colleagues.
Okay. And lastly, the attorney said that Bob declined the autopsy initially because he thought that would prevent organ harvesting, which was important to Autumn, and he didn't think it would be possible if an autopsy was done. Dr. Jinho Kim, who worked in the lab with Bob, testified for the prosecution. He told the jury that Bob asked him to keep the potassium cyanide on his workbench. After Autumn's death, he contacted police after he realized someone had moved the deadly compound when he found it in the lab refrigerator. He said he knew of no research in the lab that required cyanide, but acknowledged that it was sometimes used in the lab to promote cell death. After 8 days and 50 witnesses, the prosecution rested. The most damning evidence against Bob Ferrante was the Google searches, the rush order of the cyanide, and the presence of cyanide in Autumn's blood. Even if the amount was questionable, it was indisputable that she had cyanide in her blood. We'll be back after a break. The defense hammered away at a technician from Quest Diagnostics who did the initial cyanide test on Autumn's blood.
Remember, the test had a discrepancy. It originally came back at 3.4 and then later at 2.2, but both amounts are lethal.
The medical examiner sent Autumn's blood for additional cyanide testing to the National Medical Services, or NMS lab. NMS is known to be the most prestigious lab in the country. The cyanide level came back as non-lethal. However, there were several reasons for this. When Autumn arrived at the hospital, very little blood was drawn. Only 1 vial of blood remained from the first blood draw. This blood was crucial to the investigation because it was before she had been given fluids or any therapeutic measures had been taken, such as ECMO or dialysis.
Remember when Autumn was first at the hospital in the emergency room, they had a hard time drawing any blood.
Right.
And so they had very, very little of that first draw.
Yeah. The medical examiner sent this vial to the NMS lab, but for an unknown reason, the test didn't work and the supply was exhausted. 49 vials of Autumn's blood remained, but they were drawn after her blood had been cycled through ECMO for 3 days, and cyanide is not stable in the blood or in a test tube. And the sample was tested 18 days after the blood was drawn. Another technician testified that the NMS lab's spectrophotometer was not working, and they would not be able to produce an exact amount of cyanide in Autumn's blood, but a range. Furthermore, the vial of blood had been opened and used for other tests. Each time the vial was opened, it was a chance for the cyanide to further evaporate.
One article that I read said that half of the cyanide can evaporate within an hour, but it remains stable in the organs and tissues.
Okay. At this point, the medical examiner couldn't use another lab because too much time had elapsed. The test results ultimately provided by NMS to the medical examiner measured the cyanide between 0.3 and 0.5 on the high end of a non-lethal amount.
Remember, 1 microgram was the lethal dose. So
Okay.
this test, it was quite a bit away from
Right.
1 microgram.
Also, if jurors were to believe either of the 2 Quest blood tests, that Autumn had an extremely lethal dose of cyanide in her blood, she would have died much quicker than 3 days. The defense was trying to put reasonable doubt in the heads of the jurors, and they were succeeding. On day 10, as the trial was wrapping up, the defense called legendary forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht as an expert witness. Boy, we've been running into him a lot lately, haven't we? Wecht has consulted in high-profile cases such as Michael Jackson, John Benet Ramsey, and JFK. He once served as coroner and medical examiner in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. Known to be verbose and self-important, his current value as an expert witness is questionable and polarizing.
Oh, wow. That was kind of harsh there.
I'll say. Wecht pointed to structural abnormalities in Autumn's heart, the thickening of her heart valves, and some abnormal arteries as to why he couldn't rule out her cause of death being heart-related. He also said that the creatine she was taking could alter the cyanide test. Kim and Michael Ferrante testified next, recalling their childhoods as loving and their father as supportive. They both liked Autumn and had fond memories of her. There was no drama until the defense called their final witness, Robert Ferrante.
Once on the stand, Bob said, quote, "My wife and I were like 2 peas in a pod. We were almost exactly alike. Other than the years between us, we thought alike, did everything alike. She was having difficulty. She was becoming marginalized by the system. Harvard is typical of that. What they try to do is just create lots of competition for people so they get the best people there all the time. Being 40 miles out to be engaged in some of the peripheral hospitals, they hired a number of people to directly compete with her, and it became difficult for both her research and clinical practice." Bob took issue with Autumn being portrayed as the rising star in her field. It was himself and his experience that the University of Pittsburgh sought, he claimed. He secured a job for Autumn, not the other way around, as many saw it. Bob said they went through a bit of a rough patch when he thought Autumn had been cheating, but they'd cleared that up and they had recently taken a nice family trip to Puerto Rico. He rated their marriage an 8 out of a 10. What would you rate our marriage?
10?
11 out of 10 for me. He claimed that he needed the cyanide to initiate cell death in an exciting new study he was working on in which the 3-NP was not working. Ferrante told the jury that he was working closely with a patient stricken with ALS named Neil Alexander, who founded the Live Like Lou Foundation. Alexander offered up to $200,000 to Bob to begin research that replicated skin cells into stem cells that would mirror brain cells. And Bob explained away his Google searches as curiosity. He was on the stand for an hour and 17 minutes before the prosecution sank their teeth into him. Bob was calm and affable as prosecutor Lisa Pellegrino began questioning him. He was adamant that the cyanide ordered was for the upcoming research project, and he'd announced it at a department meeting, although no one else remembered this meeting. He made no secret of ordering the cyanide or unboxing it when it arrived. This was kind of strange. So in the lab, in front of his employees, I mean, he ordered it through one of the lab techs, and when it came, he unboxed it, and he was like, hey, look, the cyanide is here. Bob said he had no idea where the missing 8.3 grams had gone. He admitted to going through Autumn's email and finding what he called flirtatious messages, but denied that he thought she was having an affair. When he was again questioned about his Google searches, he said that many of them were because he was nervous about Autumn's organs being donated after she'd been exposed to NP3 and cyanide. Bob said that when Autumn came home on the night of April 17th, he did not give her a drink with creatine, but it was her habit to drink it when she got home. At 4:20 p.m., after 2 hours and 17 minutes, Ferrante was finished with his testimony, and the defense rested after hearing from 17 witnesses. I'm surprised that he was on the stand for that short of amount of
I
time.
am too, yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
would have
seems like
thought
it
he'd
would
be
be
up there for a
hours or
day.
days, yeah. The judge dismissed the jury, but told them that he planned to have them sequestered after closing arguments until a verdict was reached. On Thursday, November 6th, after closing arguments and the judge's instructions, the jury began deliberations at 1 p.m. The jury's first poll had 3 people for guilty, 2 for non-guilty, and 7 undecided. There were some angry outbursts among the jurors until they settled into a rhythm and agreed to judiciously re-listen to the 911 call and then review witness testimony one at a time. They broke at 7 p.m. and reconvened the next day. As they worked their way through the witness list on Friday, the jury didn't ask the judge any questions, leaving everyone wondering what was going on. Late on Friday afternoon, they took another vote, 9 guilty, 3 undecided. They'd made a lot of progress. By 6:30 p.m., they had a consensus, guilty of first-degree murder. Does that surprise you at all?
I mean, it doesn't really surprise me. No, I wouldn't have been, I don't know if I would have been surprised if they had acquitted him either, though.
Yeah, there was a little reasonable doubt there.
Yeah.
In February 2015, at the sentencing hearing, Lois Klein was present, but the elderly woman was unable to get the words out, so Assistant DA Lisa Pellegrini read her statement as she held her hand. Quote, "The loss of Autumn was never expected and has been very hard on William and I. There is no longer peace in our lives. He has definitely ruined our lives. All she ever wanted was to be able to help people. She was our only child, and the light of our lives has now been extinguished." Lois went on to talk about how Sienna was thriving despite the circumstances. She danced, took karate lessons, and was a terrific speller. She lamented the trips she and Bill had to sacrifice and the income they'd lost. A letter was also read from Sharon, Autumn's cousin and best friend. The loss of Autumn had left a large void in her life. I watched a couple of shows about this case, and Sharon was on them, and she was just heartbroken.
Yeah.
It was really sad. Kim and Michael Ferrante did not attend the hearing or write letters on their father's behalf. Ferrante declined to speak, but the judge had a lot to say to him. Before Judge Jeffrey Manning handed down his sentence, he read a quote to him by author W.H. Auden. Quote, "Society must stand in for the murder victim to either demand atonement or grant forgiveness. We are here today to demand atonement." Robert Ferrante was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ferrante appealed, claiming that the botched cyanide blood test shouldn't have been allowed as evidence and that a venue change should have been allowed. His first and subsequent appeals have all been denied. Autumn Klein wasn't just a world-class doctor and researcher. She was a loving mother, a baker, a reader, a cross-stitcher, and a friend. Her favorite color was purple, and she could touch her tongue to her nose. She had a wonderful laugh and is missed by many. Rest in peace, Autumn. While researching this case, I came across something called cyanokit, and it can save the life of someone poisoned with cyanide if they present themselves to the ER within 2 hours of the poisoning. The cyanokit binds to the cyanide and converts it to vitamin B12.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea such a thing existed. I guess that would only be useful if, like, you accidentally took cyanide and
Exactly.
you knew you took it.
Yeah.
Right?
In honor of Autumn's body of work, Brigham and Women's Hospital named their neurology program after her. Both of Autumn's donated organs were successfully transplanted. A man in his 60s wrote a letter to Bob thanking him for a second chance of life.
Oh, that's nice. I was
Yeah.
wondering about, like, if you're poisoned with cyanide. I know we talked about it, like, that it can, it can get out of your organs and stuff, but it just,
I think if you have like a healthy system
Yeah.
and, the rest, well, I guess if you're getting a donated organ, you're not that healthy, but,
right. But if the
you know,
rest of
your
your
blood
system's
is
working
healthy, it
properly,
can flush it out pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
I think if you were the recipient of an organ, you would probably not want it from someone that had cyanide poisoning, but I'm glad it
I
worked
think
out.
you would be pretty freaked out.
Well, yeah, of course.
So sadly, Bill Klein died in 2017 and Lois in 2021.
Oh.
So Sienna was still a minor. I really couldn't find any information, but I hope she's well, and I hope she's
Yeah.
well cared for. I think there were other people in her life, maybe her siblings, that could
Yeah.
have stepped in.
Well, I hope so too.
Yeah. So I'm still a little uncertain about a motive in this case.
Yes,
Like,
I am too.
Bob was a very smart man.
Right.
And I just can't imagine that he would think that he could order cyanide and get away with it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also do wonder about the motive too, because I'm sure he loved his daughter, but he didn't seem like that into having kids regardless. So why not just get a divorce and move on with your life? Like, what, I don't know what would be stopping him. He had plenty of money. So the motive part of it is a little bit perplexing to me as well.
I think it could be ego-driven. He
Mhm.
did seem like a man who had his ego, and like he wanted it made clear that, oh no, it wasn't Autumn that was offered the job in Pittsburgh. It was
Right.
me.
Yeah. When you hear stuff like that, it really does make you kind of wonder. But then, also ordering the cyanide. I mean, it sounds like he had a good excuse.
Not
at
really,
least in
though.
court. But if it wasn't like documented, it still seems.
And I
pretty
don't think the
shady.
research was going to start that week or anything, so it definitely didn't need to be
Right.
overnighted. And all those Google
The
searches.
Google searches
they're always so telling.
That is one of the most telling things to me is those Google searches. Like, I mean, I can see Googling some things out of curiosity, but the things he searched for were pretty specific.
Yeah, I think you could give him benefit of the doubt on a few of them, but not all of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think having a spouse in the medical field is a danger to your health?
I mean, not necessarily. I don't even know how to answer that. No, of course, people in the medical field are no more likely to kill their spouse than someone who's not. But
We've had a
if
lot
they
of
do decide
situations.
to kill their spouse, they're probably more capable of doing it in a way that is harder to detect than if you weren't in the medical field. So,
And it's a lot easier for people in the medical field to have access
Right.
to arsenic or cyanide or, any other number of deadly toxins.
yeah, for sure.
Do you think that May-December relationships can work? Like the difference in their ages is 23 years.
Yeah, that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, I think it is really tough to make it work. Unless you have a lot of money and you can keep yourself young and you can hire people to help care for your children. Like Alec Baldwin, for example.
Okay. Yeah, but even if you have a lot of money, there's no guarantee that you're going to like live longer and healthier, I guess, but
I think like a 5-year difference is okay. I think anything longer than that makes it pretty challenging.
I mean, I think you definitely have less in common. The further away your age gets, I think you have less in common, less things to talk
There's
about.
plenty of men your age that would date a 22-year-old and have no problem with it.
For sure, but to make it work in the long term, I do think it would be harder.
Yeah. Before we wrap up this case, I wanted to mention that historically medical research has been disproportionately focused on men, while the National Institutes of Health now mandates that women make up half of the participants in federally funded clinical trials. Disparities remain. A study analyzing 20,000 clinical trials found that women are still underrepresented in studies in cardiology, oncology, neurology, immunology, and hematology. This imbalance is significant because men and women often experience diseases differently. For example, heart disease symptoms in women can differ from those in men, leading to misdiagnosis and ineffective treatments when studies primarily focus on male subjects. Racial and ethnic minorities are also vastly underrepresented in medical research. Too often, women's symptoms are dismissed by doctors, told their illness is in their head, leaving many to struggle with misdiagnosed or overlooked conditions, which makes the loss of Dr. Autumn Klein even sadder. She took the time to listen to patients with compassion and understood how it felt to be misunderstood by a doctor.
That was very well said. And I'll just add, my mom passed away from a heart attack that she had not been diagnosed with anything beforehand. And I often wonder, because I've read that before, that, women in a lot of cases, they're, the first heart attack that you have as a woman is more likely to kill you because they're less likely to have been diagnosed beforehand with any kind of heart disease.
Yeah, the symptoms are so much different in women. And even across, women, the symptoms vary from person to person.
Right, yeah.
So I just mentioned this because Dr. Autumn Klein wanted to change that.
Yeah.
And she just seemed like a remarkable woman who really cared about women's health.
Yeah, it's a big loss.
It's a huge loss. And even her scumbag husband, I think he did really valuable research too. So it's a huge loss for the medical community to lose both of them in their field of research.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to mention the sources that I used for this case. I read a book called Death by Cyanide by Paula Reed Ward, who did a great job researching this case. I also used newspapers.com, the Pittsburgh paper that Paula Reed writes for. She wrote a lot of the articles on newspaper.com, and both of those sources were very helpful. And I wanted to thank our friend Debbie again for recommending this case to us, Debbie from True Crime University. So please give Debbie a listen. And we will post the recipe. It'll be the first thing on our show notes.
Okay.
All right, we have the rest of the weekend in front of us. What are we going to do?
Well, we lose an hour, so it's really not the whole. We have to account for that.
You're really focused on that.
Hour.
You're really bummed about losing that hour of sleep, aren't you?
I can't get over it. I don't.
Well, and you did. In your defense, you lost a lot of sleep this week.
I'm not worried about the sleep. I miss losing the hour of productivity of doing something important in the world, of working on my next case, or watching an episode of What We Do in the Shadows or whatever.
So how are you doing without any football? Or this is like
it is a hard time of year for me.
It's a hard time.
I'm not a basketball fan, and no football,
you like March
no
Madness,
baseball.
though.
I do, but even that I'm not that into.
But it hasn't even started yet, right?
I don't even know, but no, I don't think so. So yeah, it's a tough time of year.
So I'm reading this book that I am kind of excited about getting back to. It's called The Husbands by Holly Gramazio, Gramazio. And I'm really enjoying it. It doesn't have the best reviews on Goodreads, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. It's not giving anything away that's not revealed in the first chapter or two.
Okay.
But this woman, I think she's in her early 30s. She's not married. And all of a sudden, she opens her attic. Like she has a pull down attic, with the stairs. And she pulls down the attic for some reason. And all of a sudden, a man appears in her house. And her house is different. This guy is her husband.
Okay.
And she's just like, how did I get a husband? And then she figures out that the attic is somehow producing husbands. Okay. And she decides that she doesn't like the first one, so she makes an excuse and gets him back up in the attic. And so the attic keeps producing husbands, literally husband after husband.
Keeps going until she finds one that she wants.
Well, I don't know how the book ends, and if I knew that, I wouldn't tell you. I have 25% of the book to go, but I'm really enjoying it so far because the premise is really original and funny to me. Just that she's meeting all these different men, and even if it's she's like, you're chewing with your mouth open. No, you don't shower enough. No, it's just all these just teeny tiny little, not really teeny tiny. Some of are more major than others. It's just so far I'm just really
that's an interesting concept. So like a metaphor for online dating, do you think? Or
I mean pretty much, yeah. I'm just curious what, I know you're gonna say I'm a good wife and all that stuff, but what qualities would you look for in a spouse, or what are the deal breakers for you?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't thought about this for many, many years.
Yeah,
really
we do get along really well.
Yeah.
But part of it has, I think we've trained each other to extinguish some of the habits that weren't so attractive.
I guess so.
I think you're a lot neater than you used to be.
Yeah.
And I'm probably a little nicer than I used to be. I don't know. I used to be a lot moodier, I think, than I am now.
Maybe a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. You agreed to that really quick.
Maybe. I said maybe.
Maybe,
I wouldn't say for sure, but...
It's just interesting to think about. If you were to, put all the qualities that you were looking for in a mate.
Yeah.
But then you don't even know, if you could get those qualities, you might get bored of that person. And actually, that kind of, a little bit of a spoiler, but that does kind of happen where she gets this guy that checks all the boxes, and she's
but
like,
he's just not
maybe you're a little too perfect.
I can't remember for sure, but I probably made a list like that when I was in my 20s, because I was an engineer, so I was very logical and would think through things.
You made a spreadsheet, you mean?
I probably made a spreadsheet with different qualities that I was looking for, and then I had a column that had a weighting. Well, this quality is really important. This one's maybe not as important, and then I would probably put in a rating for every woman that I dated.
Produce that spreadsheet.
No, I don't. I'm pretty sure I did not actually do that, but it wouldn't shock me if I had done it.
Yeah.
But
well, I think I won the lottery with you. You're a very good husband, and I'm lucky to have you.
I stuttered when you said that.
Does it mean it's not true? You stutter. We all know I stutter a lot. When I literally cannot say the word deteriorate.
That was perfect.
I wrote the script and I had it in there 3 times.
Yeah, I'm surprised you don't just leave that word out.
You would think I would learn my lesson.
Well,
deteriorate.
Yeah, that you did it again.
You can say it if you're saying it, but if you're her brain deteriorated in the, I guess I said it there again. Well, maybe I just need to keep practicing.
Or not think about it.
Well, one thing that has not deteriorated, I said it right the second time,
Okay.
deteriorated is
Right.
our appreciation for our audience. We love you guys so much, and we appreciate all your support and all your kindness.
We sure do. We'd love to hear from you as well. Follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook. We are on both of those. Are we on other places? I can't remember where we're at
Well,
now.
you've been working on getting some TikTok stuff together. That hasn't quite
kinda
happened yet.
stalled
Yeah.
out there, but
We'll get it there eventually.
yeah, we will. Send us an email at lovemarrykill@gmail.com and consider supporting us on patreon.com/lovemarrykill. We have one tier, $5 a month, which gets you early ad-free access and a monthly bonus episode.
Until next time,
Don't kill your wife.
and don't kill your husband. Her vital signs were rapidly deteriorating. Sounded like I'm telling a joke.
Perfect.
I'm going to do it one more time, and then I'm going to change the word.
All right.
Blood coming from a vein is less oxygenated. Damn it. Say it.
Oxygenated.
Oxygenated.
There you go.
I feel like I'm just like a cartoon character saying it sometimes.